Chapter 1, The Shoebox. Debbie Allen had not intended to change her life that Thursday afternoon. She had only been looking for a scarf. It was one of those thin transitional days in early spring, where the air seemed undecided and Debbie, practical as ever, preferred to be prepared. The closet, however, had other ideas. It was a crowded, layered archive of years lived efficiently. Stacked shoes, carefully folded sweaters, storage bins labeled in a neat handwriting that suggested organization more than memory. She stood on the small step stool Kevin insisted they didn't need but had quietly bought anyway and nudged into a corner, just in case. Debbie balanced easily, pushing aside a box of winter hats. "That one's mine," Kevin had said once, smiling, though he had not touched it in 2 seasons. "Everything in here is yours by proximity," she'd replied, half joking. Now, leaning into the top shelf, she felt something unexpected where fabric and familiar shapes should have been. A small shoebox, older than the others, slightly warped at one corner. "That's odd," she murmured, though there was no one to hear her. Debbie pulled it toward her, brushing away a thin veil of dust with the palm of her hand. It was lighter than she expected. Definitely not shoes. She hesitated only briefly. This was her house, her closet, her life. Still, something about the placement felt deliberate. Careful. "Kevin doesn't hide things," she said aloud, as though the statement could anchor her to something certain. She stepped down and carried the box to the bed, sitting on the edge with a quiet exhale. The afternoon light filtered through the curtains in that familiar, gentle way, catching dust motes mid-drift. It was peaceful, normal. Debbie lifted the lid. Inside was not what she expected, though she couldn't have said what she did expect. There were cards, handmade ones, crookedly folded construction paper, brightly drawn letters that tilted in uneven lines. "Happy birthday, Dad," one read in thick purple marker. Another was unmistakably a child's attempt at a tie, glued lopsidedly onto the front of the card. She smiled despite herself. "Oh God, I remember this," she whispered. Her fingers softened as she picked it up, turning it over, remembering sticky fingers and glitter spilled on the kitchen table. Beneath the cards was a pair of socks, white, slightly faded, covered in cheerful clown faces. Debbie laughed quietly. "The Christmas phase," she said. "He wanted everything to be funny." She set the socks aside and returned to the cards, counting them without meaning to. 1, 2, 3 birthday cards. For Father's Day cards. She blinked. That can't be right. Debbie opened each one, her brow furrowing as she read the messages. The handwriting shifted slightly between them, older children's attempts, younger ones' scribbles, but something about the dates made her pause. She leaned closer. 6 years old. 5 years old. Debbie's breath slowed. No, that's not." She searched for another card, flipping through the small stack more quickly now. The box offered no resistance, no hidden layer, no second compartment full of later years. That was all there was. She sat back, the mattress dipping slightly beneath her. "No," she said firmly, shaking her head. "No, you don't just stop." Her mind moved quickly, trying to correct the mistake. Kevin was practical. He didn't keep everything. Of course he didn't. He wasn't sentimental the way she was. He wouldn't keep years and years of cards. But then why keep these? Why stop here? Debbie placed the cards back in the box, more slowly this time, aligning the edges as though neatness might restore sense to the situation. "There are more," she insisted quietly. "There have to be more." She stood abruptly and walked to the dresser where the photo albums were kept. Kevin had teased her about those too. "You've got hard copies of our lives," he'd said once, amused. "Yes," she had replied. "In case you forget them." The words landed differently now. Debbie opened the first album, flipping through pages filled with birthdays, holidays, ordinary days made noteworthy by the click of a camera. The children grew steadily, their faces shifting but familiar. She slowed at a party scene, balloons, a cake, laughter. "That's Emily's," she murmured. "Her 10th. Next page. Another birthday, this time Sophie. Graduations, holidays, family vacations." Debbie turned pages more quickly now, searching instead of reminiscing. "Where are they?" she whispered. Her fingers hesitated over one page, then another. There were no photos of Kevin standing behind a cake. No photos of the kids handing him gifts. No pictures labeled Father's Day. She flipped faster. "This is ridiculous," she said under her breath. The albums proved surprisingly consistent in their absence. Everything was there, except that. Debbie closed the book slowly, her hands resting on the cover as though it might pulse with an answer. Her heart had begun to beat faster, not from effort but from something colder. From gaps. "That doesn't make sense," she said. "We celebrated. Of course we did." She leaned back slightly, closing her eyes as she searched her own memory. A birthday dinner, a Father's Day breakfast, something, anything. What did we do last year? The question hung in the air, unanswered. Her eyes opened wider. "Okay," Debbie said, standing again. "Okay, that's fine." Her voice sounded calm, organized, the way it always did when something didn't fit. She reached for her phone. "Kids will know. Emily picked up first. Hi, Mom. Everything okay? Yes, Debbie said quickly. Yes, everything's fine. I had a quick question. Sure. Debbie hesitated only a moment. When's your dad's birthday? There was a pause. It's in the summer? Debbie's lips parted. In the summer, she repeated. I think, Emily added, less certain now. Wait, is it June? Or July? Debbie swallowed. It's fine, she said automatically. I was just checking something. I'll call you back. She ended the call before her daughter could ask anything further. Another number. Mom, Sophie said. You okay? Yes, sweetheart. Just quick. When's your dad's birthday? A longer pause this time. I'm embarrassed right now. Debbie closed her eyes. Me too, she whispered. She didn't call her son. She didn't need to. Debbie lowered herself onto the edge of the bed again. The shoebox still open beside her, its small collection suddenly feeling enormous. Her mind drifted back, searching for Kevin. Not the version she saw every day, steady and reliable, but the one somewhere behind this discovery. The one who had taken these cards and decided they were enough. And then nothing. Debbie's stomach turned, not with suspicion, but with something deeper. How did we miss that? She asked softly. Her gaze moved to the bedroom door, as though Kevin might walk through it at any moment, smiling, asking what she was doing. He would say it lightly. He always did. And then the thought came, sharp and undeniable. Why hadn't he said anything? Debbie stared at the shoebox for a long time. For the first time in years, her certainty about her life didn't feel solid, felt fragile. And she wasn't sure what would happen if she looked too closely. Chapter 2, Questions Without Answers. Debbie woke the next morning with the distinct and unsettling sensation that something in her life had shifted quietly overnight. It was not dramatic. There had been no argument, no revelation spoken aloud. The house was as it always was, clean, comfortable, predictable in its rhythms. Kevin was already up, she could tell, because the faint sound of the kettle echoed from downstairs, followed by the familiar soft click of the cupboard door that never quite closed on its own. Everything was normal. It was just that normal no longer felt quite right. Debbie lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling. Okay, she said softly to herself. You're overthinking. She swung her legs over the edge of the bed, forcing her routine into place. Shower, clothes, hair. She moved efficiently, each action practiced, almost automatic. By the time she came downstairs, she had already decided on a plan. She would ask questions, casually, carefully. There would be answers. There had to be. Kevin stood at the counter stirring his coffee when she entered. His posture relaxed, his expression easy in that way she had always found comforting. He looked up and smiled. Morning, he said. Morning, Debbie replied, watching him just a fraction longer than usual. He didn't seem different. If anything, he looked exactly the same as he always did, steady, present, kind. The man she had trusted every day of her adult life. Sleep okay? He asked, taking a sip. Yes, she answered automatically. Then, after a beat, did you? He shrugged lightly. Same as always, same as always. Debbie nodded and reached for her mug, pouring herself coffee. She leaned against the counter opposite him. Hey, she began, aiming for lightness. Random question. Kevin smiled slightly. That sounds promising. What's your favorite birthday you've ever had? He paused mid-sip, lowering his cup slowly. That's a very specific question for 7 in the morning, he said, amused. I know. I was thinking about old memories yesterday. She shrugged. Thought I'd ask. Kevin considered it, tilting his head slightly as though searching through a filing system that wasn't in any hurry to cooperate. He said after a moment. Debbie waited. You know, I'm not sure, he admitted. None stand out, she pressed lightly. He shook his head, smiling faintly. Not really. They all sort of blur together. Debbie felt something tighten subtly in her chest. All of them? She asked. Kevin glanced at her with a small, curious smile. You're very invested in this. I'm allowed to be invested, she said, attempting a laugh. It's your birthday. Fair point. He leaned back slightly against the counter, thinking again. I mean, he said slowly. The kids used to make those handmade cards when they were little. Those were nice. Debbie's fingers tightened slightly around her mug. Yeah, she said. Those were nice. Kevin nodded and took another sip. The topic clearly settled for him. Debbie watched him for a moment longer, then turned away under the pretense of reaching for sugar she didn't need. Okay, she thought. That's something. Not enough, but something. She made the first call mid-morning. This time she chose her son. Hey, Mom. Daniel's voice came through, bright and distracted in the way of someone clearly multitasking. Everything okay? Yes, Debbie said, pacing slowly across the living room. Just calling to check in. That's usually code for something, he replied. She smiled despite herself. Maybe a little. All right, what's up? Debbie hesitated briefly, then decided subtlety had limits. When you were younger, she began carefully, do you remember celebrating your dad's birthday? There was a pause on the other end, longer than she liked. I mean, Daniel said slowly. We must have, right? Do you remember anything specific? Specific like what we did? Yes. Another pause. I can picture cakes, he said uncertainly. Or no, wait, that might be someone else's birthday. Maybe yours. Debbie closed her eyes briefly. Do you remember giving him cards? She asked. Oh yeah, for sure when we were kids, Daniel said, his confidence returning slightly. We made those ridiculous ones in school. Mine were terrible. You don't remember that? Mom, I don't remember what I had for breakfast yesterday, he said, laughing lightly. You're asking me to recall first-grade art projects. This goes beyond first grade, she said softly. That sounds ominous. It's not ominous, she said quickly. I'm just collecting memories. All right, Daniel said, clearly puzzled now. Well, I know we love Dad, if that's what you're getting at. I know that too, she said, forcing a smile that he couldn't see. Okay, I'll let you get back to whatever chaos you're managing. Love you, Mom. Love you. She ended the call and stood still for a moment, her reflection faintly visible in the dark screen of her phone. Collecting memories, she repeated under her breath. So far, she was finding holes. By early afternoon, she had rotated through all 3 children again. Not at once, carefully spaced, strategic. Each conversation followed roughly the same pattern: confusion, mild embarrassment, attempts at reconstruction that never quite solidified into anything real. No, I mean, we must have done something, right? Dad never really made a big deal out of stuff. I feel like we just didn't, maybe? Debbie listened to every word, cataloging them like evidence she didn't want to believe in. By the 3rd call, she stopped asking about birthdays. She changed the angle. What about Father's Day? She asked Sophie. Oh God, Sophie groaned. You're really doing this today. Just answer the question. I honestly don't know what we did, she admitted. Brunch? That sounds like something you would have organized. Debbie pressed her lips together. That does sound like something I would have organized. Did we not? Sophie asked, her voice sharpening slightly. Mom, you're making me feel like I've missed something important. Debbie leaned against the kitchen counter, staring at nothing in particular. I think we all might have, she said quietly. By late afternoon, Debbie had run out of questions to ask others, which left her alone with the ones she hadn't yet asked herself. She returned to the photo albums, this time with a sharper focus. Not searching blindly but methodically, year by year, holiday by holiday. She made notes this time, jotting down dates in a small notebook she hadn't used in years. There's Easter, she murmured. Christmas. Birthdays, mine, the kids. She flipped another page. Anniversary. Her hand froze slightly above the next page. Debbie turned it slowly. It was a photo from 5 years ago. She and Kevin stood side by side, smiling at the camera. A dinner table set neatly behind them. Candles. A small cake. 22 years. The caption read in her own handwriting. She stared at it for a long moment. 22, she repeated. That was. Her breathing slowed as she counted backward. 5 years ago. She turned the page. Nothing. Next. Nothing. Debbie sat back, the notebook slipping slightly in her lap. No, she said, shaking her head. No, no, no. Her voice rose just slightly, the calm she had been clinging to beginning to fracture. We didn't just stop celebrating our anniversary. The words sounded absurd even as she said them. That wasn't the kind of couple they were. That wasn't the marriage they had. Debbie tried to summon the memory. The last dinner, the last acknowledgement, the last time they had paused to mark their life together. Nothing came. Not even a fragment. Her chest felt tight now, her thoughts moving too quickly to settle. Then why didn't he say anything? The question came back louder this time. More insistent. More dangerous. Debbie stood abruptly and paced the length of the room, her mind racing ahead of her. He would have said something. Kevin would have said something. Wouldn't he? She stopped walking, because suddenly, she wasn't as sure. Kevin didn't complain. He never had. He didn't demand attention. He didn't press for his own needs. He made things easy. That was one of the reasons she loved him. That was one of the reasons everything worked. And the realization came slowly, but it landed hard. Easy, Debbie whispered. Too easy. She sank down into the nearest chair, her hands resting loosely in her lap, the notebook sliding to the floor. Have we? She began, but couldn't finish the question. The answer hovered just out of reach. Not negligence, not cruelty, something quieter, something more gradual, like erosion. Debbie looked toward the front door, listening for Kevin's car. Though she knew he wouldn't be home yet, for the first time in their marriage, she found herself unsure of what she would say when he walked in. Or worse, what he wouldn't say at all. Chapter 3, the marriage she thought she knew. Debbie did not sleep well that night. Not in the way that people said lightly, as shorthand for having woken up once or twice. This was different. Her sleep was shallow, fractured, filled not with dreams, but with half-formed thoughts that never quite settled long enough to make sense. Every time she drifted off, something pulled her back. A question, a gap, a silence that shouldn't have been there. Beside her, Kevin slept the way he always did. Quietly, steadily, his breathing slow and even. Debbie lay on her back, staring at the ceiling again, listening to the predictable rhythm of him. It used to comfort her. Now it unsettled her. Not because he had changed, but because she couldn't tell if he ever had. At 3:17 a.m., she turned onto her side and watched him in the dim blue light of the digital clock. "Who are you?" she whispered softly, not in accusation, but in something closer to confusion. Kevin didn't stir. Of course he didn't. He never had. Morning came anyway, as it always did, indifferent to the quiet storm forming in her mind. Debbie stayed in bed longer than usual, listening again to the household sounds that had once meant normalcy and now felt like background noise to something she couldn't quite name. She heard Kevin move downstairs, the familiar sequence, the kettle, the cabinet, the faint creak of the kitchen chair. Routine. Reliable. Unchanged. She sat up slowly. "Okay," she said, her voice more steady than she felt. "Think." Debbie had always been someone who solved problems, organized them, broke them into pieces that could be understood and managed. This was no different. Couldn't be. She just needed perspective. By mid-morning, Debbie had taken over the dining table with notebooks, photo albums, and a pen she clicked absently between her fingers. The house was quiet again. Kevin had left for work with his usual easy, "See you tonight," and she had responded in kind. No confrontation. No tension. Just normal. Debbie stared at the word she had written at the top of the page. Marriage. Below it, she began to list what she knew. 27 years. 3 children. No major conflicts. Mutual respect. Trust. She tapped the pen against the table. "That's not nothing," she said aloud. In fact, it was everything she had always believed mattered. She flipped to a fresh page. "Kevin," she paused again. "Kind," she wrote first. Then, after a moment, "reliable, patient, low maintenance." Debbie stopped writing and leaned back slightly, her eyes narrowing faintly. "Low maintenance," she repeated. She had always meant it as a compliment. Hadn't she? She glanced down at the list again. "What do you actually want?" she murmured, as though Kevin might somehow answer from across town. The pen hovered. Nothing came. Debbie frowned slightly. "That's ridiculous," she said. "I know him." She stood abruptly and moved toward the bookshelf, pulling down an older photo album this time. The one she didn't open often, because it held the early years, the messy years, the before everything was settled years. She carried it back to the table and sat down again, opening it carefully. The first page held a picture of her and Kevin from long before they were married. They were younger, obviously, but it was more than that. They looked animated. Kevin's arm was around her, pulling her slightly off balance as they laughed at something outside the frame. Debbie touched the edge of the photograph lightly. "You were always funny," she said quietly. She turned the page. There were more dates, outings, spontaneous moments that looked less planned, less structured than their later life. "Remember this?" she said aloud, her voice softening as she found another one. "You insisted we drive 3 hours for pie. Just pie." She smiled faintly. "You said it was the best pie in the state." Debbie paused, her smile lingering. "I don't remember if it was." The thought slipped in gently, but it stayed. She turned another page. There was Kevin again, this time holding one of the girls as a baby, looking both exhausted and proud. "I remember that," she said quickly, almost defensively. "Of course I remember that." She flipped faster now, moving through years in larger jumps. First birthdays, toddler steps, school plays. Kevin was there, always there, just slightly to the side, holding something, fixing something, smiling but not the center. Debbie slowed again, her fingers brushing lightly over another photograph. "When did that happen?" she asked quietly. Not about a specific moment, but about something larger. A shift she hadn't noticed. The front door opened just after 5, the sound grounding and familiar. Kevin stepped inside, placing his keys in the same spot he always did. "I'm home," he called. "Kitchen," Debbie answered, her voice steady. He walked in a moment later, loosening his tie, looking relaxed in that end-of-day way she had always found reassuring. "You reorganizing the archives?" he asked, glancing at the spread of albums and papers across the table. "Something like that," she said. Kevin smiled faintly, pulling out a chair and sitting across from her. "Find anything interesting?" Debbie met his gaze. "Yes," she said. He picked up one of the albums, flipping it open casually. "Ah," he said. "The early chaos years." "We weren't chaotic," Debbie said automatically. Kevin raised an eyebrow, his smile widening slightly. "Debbie, we had 3 children under the age of 4 at one point. That was strategic scheduling. That was insanity." She almost laughed. Almost. Instead, she leaned forward slightly. "Can I ask you something?" she said. Kevin glanced up, still relaxed. "You can ask me anything." Debbie held his gaze. "When was the last time we celebrated our anniversary?" Kevin didn't answer right away. Not because he looked confused, but because he looked like he was thinking. Carefully. "That depends," he said slowly. "On what?" "On what you mean by celebrated," he replied. Debbie's brow furrowed slightly. Dinner. Acknowledging it. Doing something intentional. Kevin nodded once, closing the album gently. It's been a while, he admitted. How long? He exhaled lightly, leaning back in his chair. I'm not sure exactly. Debbie stared at him. You don't know? Kevin met her gaze calmly. No, he said. There was no defensiveness in it. No discomfort. Just honesty. Debbie felt her pulse quicken slightly. Does that bother you? She asked. Kevin tilted his head slightly, considering the question as though he hadn't examined it in that way before. I don't think I've thought about it much, he said. Debbie let out a short, disbelieving breath. You haven't thought about it. No, he said simply. How is that possible? She pressed. Kevin's expression didn't change much, but there was something quieter in his eyes now. Because life keeps moving, he said. There's always something. Work, the kids, everything in between. That's not an answer, she said. It's the only one I have. Debbie sat back slightly, the frustration building. Not sharp, but confused. Do you care? She asked, the question coming out softer than she intended. Kevin didn't hesitate this time. Of course I care, he said. Then why? She stopped herself, the rest of the question catching in her throat. Why didn't you say anything? Kevin watched her carefully now, the ease from earlier replaced with something more attentive. Why didn't I what? He asked quietly. Debbie shook her head. Nothing. There was a long pause. Kevin leaned forward slightly. Debbie, he said gently. What's going on? She looked at him. The man she loved, the man she trusted, the man who sat across from her now looking exactly the same as he always had. And yet, I think, she began, then stopped. Her voice felt unsteady. I think I might have missed something important, she said finally. Kevin's expression softened. You don't usually miss things, he said. I know, she replied. That's why this doesn't make sense. He held her gaze for a moment longer, then reached for her hand across the table, his touch warm, familiar. We're okay, he said quietly. Debbie looked down at their hands, then back up at him. I thought so too, she said. And for the first time, the words didn't feel like certainty. They felt like a question. Chapter 4: Kevin's quiet world. Kevin had never thought of himself as someone who required much. That wasn't humility, at least not in the way people often meant it. It wasn't modesty dressed up to invite contradiction. It was simply a fact he had come to accept about himself over time, like knowing he preferred his coffee black or that he slept better on his right side. He didn't need much. And because he didn't need much, he didn't ask for it. It had always made things easier. He noticed the change in Debbie long before she said anything about it. Not dramatically, not all at once. Debbie wasn't the kind of person who unraveled loudly. She adjusted, recalibrated, smoothed out discomfort until it didn't show. That was one of the many things he admired about her. But Kevin had been married to her for 27 years. He knew her rhythms, the way she stirred her coffee a little longer when something was on her mind, the way her questions shifted just slightly off pattern, the way her pauses meant more than her words. So when she lingered a second too long at the kitchen counter that morning, he noticed. When she asked about birthdays, he noticed more. He just didn't know what to do with it. Kevin spent most of his workday moving through tasks that required his attention but not much of himself. Spreadsheets, meetings, polite conversations about timelines and deliverables. It was work he was good at, steady, reliable, predictable, like him. But Debbie's questions followed him quietly through the day, settling into the spaces between tasks. What's your favorite birthday you've ever had? He had meant what he said. They all blurred together, not because they weren't important, just because they hadn't been, not in the way some people needed them to be. Kevin sat at his desk, staring at his computer screen without seeing it for a moment. There had been birthdays. Of course there had. He just didn't remember expecting anything from them, or missing anything when nothing stood out. That wasn't sad, not to him. It was just the default. He leaned back slightly in his chair, exhaling through his nose as a memory surfaced, not because it demanded attention, but because Debbie's questions had nudged it loose. A kitchen table, construction paper, glue that never really stuck. Dad, don't look yet. I'm not looking, he had said, covering his eyes in exaggerated compliance, smiling as he listened to the frantic rustling. You're peeking, one of the girls accused. I don't even know how to peek with my hands over my face. You're doing it wrong then. He had laughed, lowering his hands just enough to see the card being pushed toward him, glitter already falling off the edges. Happy birthday, they had chorused. Kevin smiled faintly at the memory now. Those had been good, simple, loud, messy in a way that felt alive. He reached for his coffee, now lukewarm, and took a small sip. Those were enough, he murmured to himself. They had been. They still were, in a way. By the time Kevin drove home that evening, he had already decided not to read too much into Debbie's mood. Not because he didn't care, but because he trusted her. If something was wrong, really wrong, she would tell him. She always had. And if she didn't, then maybe it wasn't something that needed fixing. The thought was comforting in its simplicity. He parked in the driveway and sat for a moment longer than usual, his hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. There was a time, years ago, when he would have replayed conversations like the one they'd had that morning, looking for meaning, wondering if he had missed something. But that had been a long time ago. Life had taught him something quieter. Not everything needed to be examined. Not everything needed to be solved. Some things just existed. He stepped out of the car and went inside. Debbie was already in the living room, though she wasn't doing anything in particular. A book rested in her lap, unopened. She looked up when he entered. "Hey," she said. "Hey," he replied easily, setting his coat aside. "Everything okay?" The question was automatic, but this time it carried more weight beneath it. Debbie hesitated. "Yeah," she said. "I just had a weird day." Kevin nodded, accepting that answer without pressing. "Want to talk about it?" he asked. "Not yet," she said. "That's fine," he replied. And it was. It always had been. Kevin moved into the kitchen, pulling open the fridge and scanning its contents with mild interest. "What's for dinner?" he called. "Leftovers," Debbie answered. "Perfect." He smiled faintly, grabbing a container and setting it on the counter. Routine again. Familiar ground. But as he moved through the motions, microwaving, grabbing a fork, leaning casually against the counter, he could feel her attention on him. Not heavy, not accusing, just focused. Kevin glanced over his shoulder. "What?" he asked, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Nothing," Debbie said quickly. "Just looking at you." He raised an eyebrow. "Should I be worried?" She almost smiled at that. "No," she said. "You're fine." Kevin studied her for a moment longer, then nodded. "Good," he said lightly. "I've grown attached to being fine." She did smile then, but it didn't fully reach her eyes. And Kevin noticed that too. They ate dinner at the table, something they had only recently started doing again now that the house was empty. It had been Debbie's idea, a way to reclaim something that used to feel central. Tonight it felt slightly formal. Not uncomfortable, just observed. Debbie watched him again as they ate, her gaze thoughtful rather than casual. "Can I ask you something else?" she said after a while. Kevin set his fork down. "Of course." She hesitated just long enough for him to notice the effort behind the question. "Do you feel appreciated?" she asked. The word lingered between them. Kevin looked at her, not startled, but not entirely prepared either. "Where is this coming from?" he asked gently. "Just answer me," she said. He leaned back slightly in his chair, considering her. "Most of the time, yeah," he said. "Most of the time?" she repeated. Kevin gave a small shrug. "I don't really think about it in those terms," he admitted. "Then how do you think about it?" He paused. "I think about whether things are good," he said slowly. "Whether we're okay. Whether the people I care about are doing well." "That's not the same thing," Debbie said. "Maybe not," Kevin agreed. "But it's what matters to me." She studied him carefully. "And what about what matters to you?" she pressed. Kevin smiled faintly. "That's what I just said." Debbie shook her head slightly. "No," she said. "You told me what you look at, not what you need." Kevin stilled for a moment, caught off guard. Not by the question, but by the precision of it. "What I need," he repeated. "Yes." There was a long pause. Kevin searched for something immediate, something clear. Nothing came. Not because he was hiding it, but because he genuinely didn't have an answer ready. "I don't know," he said finally. Debbie's expression shifted. Not frustrated this time, but something softer. "That's not possible," she said quietly. Kevin gave a small, self-conscious laugh. "It feels pretty possible from where I'm sitting." She leaned forward slightly, her voice gentler now. "When was the last time you asked yourself that question?" she asked. Kevin thought about it. Really thought this time. Not casually. Not in passing. A long silence stretched between them. "I can't remember," he admitted. Debbie sat back slowly, absorbing that. Kevin watched her. Something unfamiliar settling quietly in his chest. Not discomfort. Not quite concern. Something closer to awareness. Like noticing a small crack in a wall you'd walked past every day, and suddenly realizing it hadn't always been there. "You're worried about something," he said. Debbie met his gaze. "I think I should be," she replied. Kevin didn't respond right away. Instead, he nodded slowly. "Then let's figure it out," he said. It was such a simple statement, so consistent with who he had always been. But this time, Debbie didn't find comfort in it alone. Because for the first time, she wasn't sure if figuring it out meant fixing something, or finally seeing something that had always been there. Chapter 5, The Failed Surprise. By Friday morning, Debbie had reached a conclusion. It wasn't a comfortable one. It wasn't even particularly well-formed. But it was something she could act on, and right now, action felt preferable to thinking. She was going to fix this. Not fix, she corrected herself aloud, standing in the kitchen with a notepad and a pen clutched like a lifeline. Rebalance. Adjust. The word didn't matter. What mattered was this. Kevin deserved to be seen. And if the past had slipped quietly out of focus, then the present needed to be sharp, intentional, impossible to miss. Debbie nodded once, as though sealing an agreement with herself. Okay, she said. We are going to celebrate your father. The group text thread was immediately less helpful than she had hoped. Mom, we need to plan something for your dad. Important. Respond. 3 dots appeared almost instantly. Emily, that sounds mildly threatening. Sophie, did we forget something again? Daniel, I'm afraid to answer this. Debbie inhaled slowly. Mom, no jokes. I'm serious. When is the last time we properly celebrated your father? There was a pause this time. Longer. Then Emily. Define properly. Debbie closed her eyes briefly. We are starting from 0, she muttered. An hour later, she had them all on a group call. I don't understand why this feels like a business meeting, Sophie said, her voice crackling slightly through the speaker. There's tension. There should be tension, Debbie replied. We've all dropped the ball. Daniel snorted softly. We don't even know which ball we dropped. That's the problem. Emily sighed. Mom, can you just tell us what you want us to do? Debbie straightened, tapping her pen against the notepad. We are planning a surprise for your father, she said firmly. A real one. Not last minute. Not something improvised. Something that actually reflects that we… She hesitated, then finished more quietly. See him. The line went silent. Then Sophie spoke, her tone softer now. Okay, she said. Yeah, that's fair. Good, Debbie replied quickly, regaining momentum. Now ideas. Another pause. What does Dad like? Daniel asked. Debbie blinked. What do you mean, what does he like? I mean, what does he really like? Daniel clarified. Not generic stuff. Not he eats food and breathes air. Like hobbies. There was a beat of uncomfortable quiet. Debbie opened her mouth, closed it again. I mean, he reads, she said finally. What does he read? Emily asked. Debbie hesitated. Books, she offered weakly. Daniel exhaled loudly. This is going great. The planning session lasted an hour. By the end of it, they had assembled something that resembled a plan, but only if one was willing to be generous with the definition. A dinner. At home. All 3 kids would attend. They would cook, or rather attempt to. There would be decorations. Not excessive, Debbie had insisted. We're not recreating a theme park. Daniel had volunteered to bring something meaningful, though he had refused to elaborate, which Debbie didn't entirely trust. Sophie had taken charge of dessert, announcing confidently, I will make it memorable. That sounds ominous, Emily had replied. It will be nostalgic, Sophie corrected. No one in this conversation should be trusted with nostalgia, Daniel muttered. Despite everything, Debbie found herself smiling. Okay, she said, clapping her hands once. This is happening. The day of the surprise arrived quickly. Too quickly. Debbie spent most of the afternoon moving through the house like a general preparing for an operation. Adjusting table settings, rearranging chairs, checking the oven every 5 minutes as though it might betray her. Focus, she told herself. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it did have to be something. The doorbell rang at exactly 4. Daniel walked in first, carrying a grocery bag and looking suspiciously pleased with himself. I bring contributions, he announced. Debbie eyed the bag. That's not enough food for everyone. It's not food. That's concerning. Trust me. I don't trust you, she said immediately. Fair. Moments later, Emily and Sophie arrived together, both talking at once as they entered the kitchen. The traffic was ridiculous. I told her to leave earlier. You always say that after we're late, because it's always true. Girls, Debbie interrupted firmly. They stopped, looking at her. You're here now. Good. Let's stay focused. Emily blinked. This is very intense. It is intense, Debbie said. We're doing something important. Sophie leaned toward her sister and whispered, loudly enough to be heard. I think we're in trouble. You are not in trouble, Debbie said. You are participating. The first sign that things were going wrong came with the appetizers. Are these burnt? Emily asked cautiously, holding up a tray. They are crispy, Sophie corrected. They're black. They have character. Debbie pinched the bridge of her nose. Okay, it's fine. We have other food. We do, Daniel asked. Debbie turned slowly toward him. You brought something, right? He said quickly. Not food. Debbie inhaled slowly. Of course you didn't. The second sign came when the decorations refused to cooperate. Why won't this banner stay up? Sophie demanded, wrestling with a strip of tape. Because gravity exists, Daniel offered helpfully. Don't talk unless you're helping. I am helping. Morale counts. It does not. Debbie stepped in, pressing the banner firmly against the wall. Just leave it like this, she said. It doesn't have to be perfect. The tape peeled off immediately. The banner slid sideways. Daniel caught part of it before it fell. This feels symbolic, he said. No commentary, Debbie replied sharply. By the time Kevin's car pulled into the driveway, the house looked assembled. Not perfect, not seamless, but filled, alive. Debbie wiped her hands on a towel and turned to her children. Positions, she whispered. Daniel raised an eyebrow. What positions? Just Hide or something. Hide where? We're adults, not furniture. Just stand out of sight. They scattered awkwardly, none of them entirely convinced of the plan but committed enough to try. The front door opened. I'm home, Kevin called. Debbie felt her heart jump, not from nerves she could name, but from the weight of what this moment was meant to fix. Happy, she began as he stepped into the room. Surprise, the others shouted, slightly off timing. Kevin stopped in the doorway. He blinked. Once, twice. His gaze moved slowly across the room. The uneven banner, the crowded table, his children standing in semi-hiding positions that fooled no one. Then back to Debbie. There was silence. Not long, but long enough. What's going on? He asked. The question wasn't suspicious. It wasn't defensive. It was genuinely unclear. Debbie stepped forward, smiling too brightly. We're celebrating you, she said. Kevin's expression shifted, softening, but also tightening in a way she hadn't expected. Celebrating me? He repeated. Yes, Emily said quickly. Because we, haven't done that properly. For a while, Sophie added. For a long while, Daniel said. Kevin looked at each of them in turn, then back at Debbie. You didn't have to do this, he said gently. I know, she replied. But we wanted to. There was another small pause. Then Kevin smiled. It was warm, real. But there was something behind it now. Something quieter, harder to read. Well, he said, stepping fully into the room. This is definitely a surprise. Daniel clapped his hands once. Great. Let's eat before anything catches fire again. That was one time, Sophie snapped. It was 5 minutes ago. Dinner, predictably, did not go smoothly. Conversations overlapped awkwardly. Jokes missed their timing. And at one point the oven alarm blared loud enough to silence all attempts at casual conversation. This is lively, Kevin said, glancing around the table. Debbie laughed, but it felt tight. Lively is good, she said. Lively is something, he agreed. As the night went on, Debbie watched him closely. Not for what he said, but for what he didn't. He smiled. He engaged. He thanked them more than once. But he didn't seem changed, moved, surprised, yes, appreciative, certainly, but not reached. And the realization slipped in quietly, landing heavier than she expected. This wasn't about one night. It wasn't something that could be corrected with effort and good intentions and slightly burnt appetizers. Debbie sat back, listening as Daniel attempted to explain whatever it was he had brought. A framed photo collage that none of them remembered taking and Kevin didn't quite recognize. Where did you even find this? Emily asked. I made it, Daniel said proudly. When? Recently. It's from stock images, Sophie said flatly. It's symbolic. Of what? No one answered. Kevin smiled anyway. It's nice, he said. And that was the moment it became painfully clear. They didn't actually know what would be nice. Not really. Debbie looked around the table, at her children, at her husband, and felt something settle into place. Not with panic this time, but with certainty. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a single oversight. It was years. Years of small, unspoken assumptions. Years of mistaking quiet for contentment. Years of never asking the question until now. She leaned forward slightly, her voice cutting gently through the noise. Next time, she said. Everyone looked at her. There's going to be a next time? Daniel asked. Yes, Debbie replied firmly. And it's going to be better. Kevin met her gaze across the table. For a moment, something unspoken passed between them. Something deeper than confusion, deeper than humor. Something that looked a lot like truth beginning to surface. He nodded slowly. Okay, he said. Not dismissive, not uncertain, just open. And for the first time since she found the shoebox, Debbie felt like they might actually be starting the right conversation. Chapter 6, Cracks and Conversations. The house felt quieter after the children left. Not empty, Debbie had adjusted to that long ago, but noticeably still. The lingering warmth of voices, laughter, and awkward energy had dissipated, leaving behind the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the wall clock. Kevin stood in the kitchen rinsing dishes, moving steadily, methodically, as he always did. Debbie watched him from the doorway for a moment before stepping in. You don't have to do that tonight, she said. He didn't turn, just smiled slightly as he rinsed another plate. I know, he said, but it'll bother me if I leave it. That tracks, Debbie replied softly. She moved beside him, picking up a dish towel and drying the plate he set down. They worked that way for a few minutes, quiet, familiar, efficient. 27 years distilled into shared movement. It should have felt comforting. Instead, it felt like something unfinished was sitting between them, waiting to be acknowledged. Debbie set the last plate down and took a small breath. I don't think that went the way I wanted it to, she said. Kevin dried his hands slowly, turning to face her. I don't think it went badly, he replied. That's not what I meant. I know. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Kevin leaned back slightly against the counter, folding his arms loosely. What did you want it to feel like? He asked. Debbie hesitated. More meaningful, she said finally. Less like we were guessing. Kevin nodded once as if that made sense. We were guessing, he said. I know, she replied. That's the problem. Another quiet moment passed. Then Kevin tilted his head slightly. You've been trying to figure something out for a few days now, he said. You want to tell me what it is? Debbie looked at him, really looked this time. Not just at his expression, but at the steadiness behind it. The patience, the openness. It made what she had to say feel heavier somehow. I found something, she said. Kevin didn't interrupt. She walked to the counter and rested her hands on its edge, grounding herself. In the closet, she added. A shoebox. On the top shelf. Kevin's expression didn't change much, but something in his eyes sharpened slightly. Okay, he said. It had your old cards in it. From the kids. When they were little. Kevin exhaled softly through his nose. Yeah, he said. I know the one. Debbie swallowed. Kevin. There were only a few. I know. She blinked. You know? He nodded. Debbie stared at him, her breath catching slightly in her chest. Why are there only a few? She asked. Kevin didn't answer immediately. Not because he didn't understand the question, but because he was choosing how to answer it. I kept the ones they made when they were young, he said finally. And the rest, Debbie pressed. He gave a small shrug. I didn't keep them. Why? Kevin met her gaze, his expression calm, but not distant. Because they stopped coming, he said. The words landed quietly, but they landed heavily. Debbie felt something twist inside her chest. They didn't stop, she said quickly. We must have. She stopped herself, the sentence collapsing under its own uncertainty. Kevin didn't correct her, didn't rush to explain. He just waited. Debbie shook her head slightly, her voice softening. We must have forgotten, she said, more to herself than to him. Kevin gave a faint, almost sympathetic smile. Yeah, he said. That was all. No accusation, no edge, just agreement. And somehow that made it worse. Debbie turned away, pacing once across the kitchen, then back again. I don't understand how that happens, she said. How do you just forget someone like that? How do you not notice? Kevin watched her carefully. It doesn't feel like forgetting when you're in it, he said. What does it feel like? He thought about that. It feels like everything else is louder, he replied. There's always something urgent, something that needs attention right now. Debbie stopped pacing. And you? She asked. You weren't urgent? Kevin gave a small, almost amused exhale. I never tried to be. That's not funny. I'm not joking. Debbie stared at him. Why wouldn't you say something? She asked, her voice tightening now, not angry, but strained. Kevin held her gaze. What would I have said? That you were being overlooked, she replied. That you mattered. I know I matter, he said gently. That's not the same thing. Kevin's expression softened slightly, but he didn't look away. No, he agreed. It's not. So why? She stopped again, pressing her hands together. Why didn't you say anything when we stopped celebrating things? Birthdays, Father's Day, our anniversary. Kevin looked down briefly, then back at her. There's never a clean moment to bring that up, he said. Debbie frowned. There has to be. Not really, Kevin replied. There's no good way to interrupt a normal day and say, hey, I think you've all forgotten about me a little. His voice wasn't bitter. It wasn't even particularly sad. Just a matter of fact. Debbie felt her chest tighten again. Then you pick a messy moment, she said. You say it anyway. Kevin shook his head slightly. That's not how I work, he said. I know that's not how you work, she replied quickly. But maybe it should be sometimes. They stood in silence for a long beat. Then Kevin stepped forward slightly, his voice quieter now. Debbie, he said. I didn't feel forgotten. She blinked. What? I didn't feel pushed out, he clarified. I didn't feel unloved. But you were being overlooked, she insisted. Maybe, he said. But that didn't cancel everything else. Debbie struggled with that, the logic and emotion pulling in different directions. So you just accepted it? She asked. Kevin tilted his head slightly. I didn't think of it that way. Then how did you think of it? He hesitated again. But this time it wasn't because he didn't know the answer. It was because he had never said it out loud. It's just how things settled, he said. The kids needed more when they were growing up. You were managing everything. I didn't want to be another thing you had to manage. Debbie's eyes widened slightly. You were never something I had to manage, she said. Kevin gave a faint smile. Maybe not, but that's how it felt to me sometimes. That's not fair, she said softly. I wasn't making it a fairness issue. Then what were you making it? He paused. Ease, he said. The word hung between them. Debbie let out a slow breath. Everything was easy, she murmured. Kevin nodded. It worked. Did it? She asked. That made him pause longer. Long enough to reconsider. It worked, in a lot of ways, he said carefully. But not all, she finished. Kevin didn't argue. Debbie stepped closer now, her voice softer, more deliberate. I don't want easy, If it means we stop seeing each other, she said. Kevin met her gaze. I never stopped seeing you, he replied. Her throat tightened. I think I stopped seeing parts of you, she admitted. The honesty of it settled heavily in the room. Kevin didn't look hurt, but he did look thoughtful, as if something had finally been named that he had lived with quietly. Well, he said after a moment, we're talking about it now. Debbie let out a small, breathless laugh. That sounds like your version of optimism. It is, he said. She studied him for a moment, then shook her head slightly. I don't know how to fix this, she said. Kevin smiled faintly. Good, he replied. She blinked. Why is that good? Because if you knew how to fix it right away, he said, it would probably mean we hadn't actually understood the problem yet. Debbie stared at him. That's annoyingly reasonable. I try. She exhaled, some of the tension in her shoulders easing for the first time in days. So what do we do? She asked. Kevin thought about it. Not quickly, not automatically, which Debbie realized might have been the point all along. We start paying attention, he said. To what? To the things we stopped noticing, he replied. Debbie nodded slowly. That sounds simple. It probably won't be, Kevin said. She huffed a quiet laugh. Nothing about this has been simple. No, he agreed. They stood there for a moment longer, the space between them no longer filled with avoidance, but with something more deliberate. Not solved, not finished, but real. Debbie reached for his hand. He let her take it. This time she held it differently, not out of habit, but intention, and Kevin noticed that too. Chapter 7 Rediscovery. Debbie did not expect change to feel so deliberate. She had always believed the best parts of her marriage had come naturally, that she and Kevin had simply aligned in all the ways that mattered, moving forward without much resistance, without the friction other couples seemed to describe like a rite of passage. Now, she found herself scheduling conversations. Not formally, she refused to become that version of herself, but intentionally enough that it was undeniable. Rediscovery, she said quietly to herself as she scrolled through her contacts. The word felt unfamiliar, but necessary. She started with Emily. They met at a small cafe halfway between Emily's office and Debbie's home, a place Debbie had chosen specifically because it would force the conversation out of the comfortable patterns of a phone call. Emily arrived 5 minutes late and 2 degrees flustered, her coat half-buttoned and her phone still in her hand. I have exactly 1 hour, she said, sliding into the chair. But now I'm curious enough that I might stretch that. Debbie smiled faintly. I'll try to earn the extra time. Emily narrowed her eyes slightly, amused. That sounds serious. It is, Debbie said. She didn't ease into it this time. Tell me about your dad, she said. Emily blinked. That's a broad assignment. Then narrow it, Debbie replied. What do you know about him right now, as an adult? Emily set her phone face down on the table, considering. Well, she said slowly, he's still the same, quiet, reliable, kind. Debbie nodded. Yes, all true. He's easy to be around, Emily added. Debbie leaned forward slightly. What is he like? She asked. Emily hesitated. I told you, she said. He reads, watches stuff. He's not complicated. That's not an answer, Debbie said gently. Emily frowned, clearly trying now. He likes history, I think, she offered. What kind of history? I don't specific history? They both paused. That's not good, Emily admitted. No, Debbie said. It's not. Emily leaned back, folding her arms. Okay, she said. What's the point of this? Debbie took a slow breath. The point is that I think we've been describing your father instead of knowing him, she said. Emily's expression shifted. That's a strong statement, she said. I found a box of his old cards, Debbie continued. The last ones he kept were from when you were 6. Emily's posture stilled. What? She said quietly. Yes, that doesn't make sense. I know. Emily exhaled slowly. That's not great, she said. No, Debbie repeated. There was a long pause before Emily spoke again, more carefully this time. So what do you want me to do? She asked. Debbie met her gaze. I want you to talk to him, she said. Not like you always do. Not the update version. Not the how's work, how's life checklist. Then like what? Like you don't already know who he is, Debbie said. Emily let out a small, disbelieving laugh. That's going to feel awkward. Yes, Debbie said. It will. Sophie required less convincing. Mostly because she reacted first and processed later. This is awful, she said immediately over the phone. We've accidentally emotionally neglected Dad. Debbie winced slightly. I wouldn't phrase it that way. I would. That's exactly what it is. Sophie? No, Mom, it's fine, she said, cutting her off. It's fixable. We just need a plan. Debbie hesitated. I don't think this needs a plan, she said. I think it needs attention. Attention is a plan, Sophie replied confidently. Debbie rubbed her temple. Please don't turn this into a project. Too late, Sophie said. I've already started a list. That's exactly what I was afraid of. You're welcome. Despite herself, Debbie smiled. What's on the list? She asked. Sophie didn't hesitate. Step 1. I'm taking Dad out to dinner. One-on-one. Debbie blinked. You are? Yes. Neutral territory. No distractions. No family noise. That's actually a good idea, Debbie admitted. I have flashes of brilliance, Sophie said. Do you know what you're going to ask him? I'm going to let him talk, Sophie said. Debbie paused. That was not what she expected. That might be the best approach you've ever had, she said. I know, Sophie replied. It's unsettling for me too. Daniel was the hardest. Not because he resisted, but because he avoided. Mom, I don't see the issue, he said when she brought it up. We talk to Dad. We check in. Everything's fine. Debbie held the phone tighter. Fine is not the same as connected, she said. That sounds like something from a podcast, Daniel replied. Daniel, I'm just saying, it feels like we're making this bigger than it is. And what if we've been making it smaller than it is for years? She countered. There was a pause. Daniel didn't respond immediately. Okay, he said finally. That's not a bad point. Debbie exhaled quietly. Will you talk to him? She asked. I always talk to him. Will you actually listen this time? Daniel was quiet for a few seconds. That feels like a trap question. It's not a trap, she said. It's just a different kind of conversation. Another pause. All right, he said finally. I can try. Don't try, Debbie corrected. Do. Now you're being intense again. Yes, she said. I am. The first shift came sooner than Debbie expected. On Sunday afternoon, Kevin was in the living room reading when his phone rang. He answered without looking at the screen. Hey, he said. There was a pause. Then his expression shifted, subtly, but enough that Debbie noticed from the kitchen doorway. Sure, he said. Yeah, I can do that. Another pause. Tonight. His eyebrows lifted slightly. Okay, that sounds good. Debbie leaned against the doorframe, watching quietly. Kevin ended the call and looked up, noticing her. Sophie, he said. I guessed, Debbie replied. She wants to take me to dinner. Debbie smiled. That's nice. Kevin nodded, still slightly surprised. Yeah, he said. It is. He hesitated for a moment. She didn't say why. Debbie tilted her head. Does she need a reason? Kevin considered that. No, he said slowly. I guess not. Later that evening, Debbie tried not to wait for him. She told herself she wouldn't. She failed. When Kevin came home, there was something different about him. Not dramatic, not overwhelming, but noticeable. He set his keys down more slowly, took a moment before speaking. How was it? Debbie asked, unable to keep the question in. Kevin smiled faintly. It was good, he said. Just good. He shook his head slightly. Different kind of good. Debbie leaned forward slightly. What does that mean? Kevin hesitated, searching for the right words. She asked me questions, he said. What kind of questions? Not the usual ones, he replied. More specific. Debbie felt a small lift in her chest. And I had to think about the answers, he said. She smiled. I imagine that was shocking. It was slightly inconvenient, he admitted. Debbie laughed softly. That sounds like you. Kevin stepped closer, his expression thoughtful. She asked me what I would do if I had a year off with no responsibilities, he said. Debbie blinked. What did you say? He smiled faintly. I didn't have an answer right away. And now, he shrugged. I said I'd probably travel. Slowly, not rush through it. Debbie studied him. I didn't know that, she said. Kevin looked at her. I didn't either, he admitted. The honesty of it settled between them. Strange but not uncomfortable. Just new. Debbie nodded slowly. That's something, she said. Kevin smiled again, softer this time. It is. Later that night, as Debbie lay in bed, she realized something that shifted everything just slightly. This wasn't about reclaiming what they had lost. It wasn't even about fixing something broken. It was about discovering something they had never fully examined. Kevin had always been there, present, steady, reliable, but presence wasn't the same as visibility. And real love required both. Debbie turned onto her side, looking at him in the dim light again. This time, she didn't feel uncertain. She felt curious. Who are you? She whispered softly. Kevin stirred slightly, his eyes opening just enough to focus on her. That depends, he said sleepily. Who's asking? Debbie smiled. I am, she said. Kevin blinked once, then smiled back, small but genuine. Well, he murmured, already drifting again. I guess we'll find out. Debbie lay awake a little longer, but this time it wasn't from worry. It was anticipation. Chapter 8, Rewriting the Rituals. The first change did not announce itself. There was no grand plan unveiled. No family meeting where everyone agreed to do better and sign something symbolic. That would have been too neat, too tidy for what they had unearthed. Instead, the shift came quietly through choices. Small ones, intentional ones, and, for Debbie, uncomfortable ones. It began on a Tuesday. That, in itself, felt significant. Not a holiday. Not an anniversary. Not an occasion that demanded attention. Just a day. Kevin was in the living room again, reading. He seemed to do that more often now, or maybe Debbie had simply started noticing it. The book rested lightly in his hand. His posture relaxed. One leg crossed over the other in a way that suggested complete absence of urgency. Debbie stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him. Don't observe, she told herself. Engage. She walked in. What are you reading? She asked. Kevin glanced up, mildly surprised. Not because she had never asked before, but because of the way she asked now. More focused. Less automatic. It's about trade routes in the 1800s, he said. Debbie blinked. Trade routes. He smiled faintly. I know. Riveting. No, she said quickly, stepping further into the room. I mean, why that? Kevin tilted his head slightly. Why not? He replied. That's not an answer, she said, echoing herself from days earlier. Kevin considered that, then lowered the book completely this time. I like how things connect over time, he said slowly. How decisions people made in one place end up affecting things somewhere completely different. Debbie leaned against the back of the chair opposite him. I didn't know you thought about things like that, she said. Kevin raised an eyebrow faintly. What did you think I thought about? Debbie hesitated. That's not a great question for me to answer right now, she admitted. Kevin smiled, a little broader this time. Fair enough. She nodded toward the book. Tell me something from it, she said. Something? Anything, Debbie replied. I want to hear it the way you think about it. There was a brief pause, not resistance, but recalibration. Then Kevin shifted slightly in his seat. Well, he said, there's this part about how one of the routes became important not because it was efficient, but because it was the one people trusted. Debbie listened, her focus steady. And that changed things? She asked. It shaped everything, Kevin said. Once people relied on it, it didn't matter that there were technically better options. They stayed with what felt predictable. Debbie absorbed that, her expression thoughtful. That sounds like us, she said quietly. Kevin met her gaze. Yeah, he said. The conversation didn't resolve anything. It didn't need to, but it lingered. Sophie's version of rewriting was less subtle. 3 days after their dinner, Kevin received a package. No return address? He said, turning the box over in his hands. Debbie leaned over his shoulder, curious. It's from Sophie, she said, spotting the familiar handwriting. Kevin opened it carefully. Inside were 3 items. A book, a small, worn-looking notebook, and a printed document that looked suspiciously like an itinerary. What is this? Debbie asked. Kevin picked up the note first. It was written in Sophie's bold, slightly chaotic handwriting. Dad, Step 1. I refuse to accept that you don't have opinions about things. Step 2. I am giving you tools to prove that wrong. Step 3. We are building evidence. Call me. S. Kevin smiled slowly as he read it. I don't know whether to be impressed or slightly concerned, he said. Both, Debbie replied. He opened the notebook next. The first page had already been written in. Things I actually like, according to me. Below it, a single line had been started. Kevin exhaled softly, something almost like a laugh slipping through. She's giving you homework, Debbie said. Apparently. Are you going to do it? Kevin glanced at her, then back at the notebook. Maybe, he said. Daniel approached the task differently. Less structure. More interruption. Kevin was halfway through fixing a loose hinge on the back gate when Daniel showed up unannounced that Saturday afternoon. Hey, Daniel said, walking into the yard as though this were entirely normal. Kevin looked up, one eyebrow lifting. Hey, he replied. I didn't know you were coming. I didn't either until this morning. That explains a lot. Daniel leaned casually against the fence, watching him work. You're good at that, he said after a moment. Kevin glanced at him. At tightening screws? At fixing things, Daniel clarified. Kevin shrugged. It's usually just patience. Daniel nodded, considering that. Then, without warning, why do you never talk about work? Kevin paused, screwdriver still in hand. Because it's not very interesting, he said. That's not an answer, Daniel replied. Kevin looked at him more fully this time. Is this part of your mother's campaign? He asked. Partially, Daniel admitted. But also, I don't actually know what your day looks like. Kevin set the screwdriver down. That's a new question from you, he said. I'm expanding my range. Kevin smiled slightly. Well, he said, wiping his hands on a cloth. Most of my day is meetings and emails. About. Kevin hesitated, then gave a short explanation, projects, coordination, the kind of work that was rarely exciting but always necessary. Daniel listened more closely than Kevin expected. That sounds complicated, he said. It's organized, Kevin replied. There's a difference. Daniel nodded slowly. Yeah, he said. I don't think I've ever asked you that before. No, Kevin agreed. You haven't. There was no accusation in it. But Daniel still shifted slightly, uncomfortable. That's on me, he said. Kevin shook his head. It's not on anyone, he replied. That's very on brand for you, Daniel said. And Emily took the longest. Not because she resisted, but because she approached it methodically like everything else in her life. She called Kevin midweek. Hi, she said, skipping her usual preamble. I have a question. Kevin smiled into the phone. I'm sensing a pattern, he said. Probably, she replied. What do you miss? Kevin blinked. That's specific. I'm aiming for clarity, Emily said. Kevin leaned back in his chair, taken off guard. Not by the question itself, but by its weight. What do I miss? He repeated. Yes. There was a long pause. I miss when the house was louder, he said finally. Emily softened slightly on the other end of the line. Really? Yeah, Kevin said. Not all the time, but sometimes. Another pause. I thought you liked the quiet, she said. I do, he replied. Just not exclusively. Emily let out a quiet breath. That makes sense, she said. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Emily cleared her throat. I'm coming over Sunday, she said. No agenda. Kevin smiled. I believe that even less than you think I do, he said. It's flexible, she corrected. By the end of the week, the house felt different. Not transformed. Not dramatically changed. But observed. Intentional. Alive in a way that wasn't driven by schedules or responsibilities, but by attention. Debbie stood in the kitchen one evening, watching Kevin at the table. Not reading this time, but writing in the small notebook Sophie had given him. He paused occasionally, thinking, then added another line. What are you up to? She asked. Kevin glanced up. Apparently, I like hiking, he said. Debbie blinked. You like hiking? I didn't realize it until I wrote it down, he admitted. She smiled, walking over to sit beside him. Anything else surprising? He turned the notebook slightly so she could see. 2. Traveling slowly. 3. Old bookstores. 4. Quiet mornings. 5. Good coffee, not yours, Debbie gasped softly. Excuse me? Kevin smiled. I stand by it. She nudged his shoulder. I have been making your coffee for 27 years. And I've appreciated the consistency, he said smoothly. That is not a recovery. It wasn't meant to be. Debbie laughed. Really laughed this time. The sound lighter than it had been in days. That's fair, she said. She studied the list again, her expression softening. I didn't know half of this, she admitted. Kevin closed the notebook gently. I didn't either, he said. And this time it didn't feel like a gap. Felt like a beginning. Later that night, as they turned out the lights and settled into bed, Debbie shifted closer to him. There's something strange about all of this, she said. Kevin glanced at her in the dark. What's that? It doesn't feel like we lost something, she said slowly. It feels like we skipped something. Kevin considered that. Yeah, he said. That sounds right. She leaned her head lightly against his shoulder. I don't want to skip it anymore, she said. You don't have to, Kevin replied. Debbie smiled faintly. I know. And for the first time, not just in days but in years, she felt like they weren't just continuing the life they had built. They were actively choosing the one they were still creating. Chapter 9, a proper celebration. This time, Debbie did not rush. That alone made everything different. There was no frantic list scribbled in the margins of a half-thought plan. No sense of urgency disguised as intention. Instead, she moved deliberately, almost carefully, as though each decision carried weight and deserved it. This isn't a correction, she said to herself one morning, standing in the quiet kitchen with a cup of coffee that Kevin would absolutely judge. This is something new. She let that sit. New meant intentional. New meant informed. New meant for once she wouldn't assume. The group thread had changed, too. It was no longer reactive. No guilt-driven urgency or awkward joking deflections. Instead, it had become unexpectedly collaborative. Emily, we should not do this all at once again. Smaller, intentional. Sophie, agreed. Also, Dad hates chaos disguised as enthusiasm. Daniel, in fairness, we are chaos disguised as enthusiasm. Mom, we are going to channel that into something better. There was a pause. Then Sophie, I have a concept. Daniel, I'm nervous whenever you say that. Emily, let her finish. Sophie, we build it around things he actually likes, not things we think he should like. Debbie smiled at that. Progress. The date they chose wasn't his birthday. That Debbie realized mattered. It removed pressure. Removed expectation. This wasn't about catching up or making up for something missed. It was about recognition. They chose a Saturday. Quiet. Open. Flexible. Kevin had been told only that everyone was coming over. No theme, he had asked mildly. No theme, Debbie confirmed. That was true. Mostly. The day unfolded gently. Debbie kept the house simple. Clean but not staged. Welcoming but not theatrical. There were no banners this time. No decorations wrestling with tape or collapsing under their own ambition. Instead, there were details. Subtle. Intentional. A stack of books Debbie had quietly picked out from the local bookstore, based not on guesses, but on actual conversations Kevin had had over the past week. Fresh coffee, better coffee. She'd asked for help this time. You're outsourcing my standards? Kevin had teased when he noticed the change. I'm raising them, she replied. He had laughed, and then admitted it was better. She counted that as a victory. The children arrived in staggered intervals. Emily first, carrying nothing obvious. Where's your contribution? Debbie asked. Emily nodded toward the living room. Already set up. Debbie walked in and blinked. A small table had been arranged in the corner. Not elaborate, but intentional. On it sat a simple framed map, marked with several routes in clean lines. Debbie tilted her head. What is this? Emily shrugged lightly. Places he mentioned wanting to see, she said. I just mapped them out. Debbie looked closer. They weren't random. They were slow paths, connected places. Of course he would think about travel like this, she murmured. Emily smiled faintly. Yeah, she said. He really would. Sophie arrived next, carrying 2 bags and an unmistakable sense of momentum. Okay, she announced, sweeping into the kitchen. This is not a structured event, but I do have flow. Debbie didn't even question it anymore. What kind of flow? Natural, Sophie said. Light. Something that lets people actually talk. She paused, then added, almost sheepishly. I asked him to show me one of his favorite books later. Debbie blinked. You did. Don't make it a thing, Sophie warned quickly. Just let it happen. Debbie smiled. I won't. Daniel was last. He walked in holding something carefully wrapped in brown paper. His usual casual confidence slightly tempered. What did you bring? Sophie asked immediately. Daniel hesitated. Something real, he said. That's vague, Emily replied. It's supposed to be. Debbie studied him for a moment. This is new for you, she said. Yeah, he admitted. Don't ruin it. Kevin arrived last. That too felt different. Usually, he was already there, the constant point around which everything else moved. Today, he stepped in as the final piece, and he noticed the shift immediately. He paused in the doorway, not because anything looked dramatically different, but because it felt considered. That's a new look, Daniel said, gesturing toward the jacket Kevin wore. Kevin glanced down. I've owned this for 10 years. You've never worn it, Sophie said. Apparently, today felt like the day. Debbie met his gaze. She smiled. It did. There was no formal beginning. No announcement. They drifted into the evening. And that was, perhaps, the most intentional choice of all. It started with coffee. Not because it had to, but because Kevin lingered near the kitchen, noticing the difference. You upgraded, he said, taking a sip. Debbie leaned casually against the counter. I listened, she replied. He smiled. That's new. I'm full of surprises. Apparently. Across the room, Emily watched them, her expression softer than usual. Look at that, she murmured to Sophie. They're flirting. They've always flirted, Sophie said. Not like that. Daniel's moment came quietly. He handed Kevin the brown paper-wrapped item with less commentary than usual. This is something I thought you'd like, he said. Kevin raised an eyebrow gently. High expectations from that sentence, he replied. He unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a small, well-bound journal. Not blank. Written. Kevin flipped it open, his expression shifting as he read. What is this? He asked. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. It's notes, he said. Things I remembered you saying over the years. Stuff I didn't realize stuck until I started writing it down. Kevin didn't speak right away. He kept flipping. Short entries. Simple observations. Advice captured. Moments remembered. Debbie watched his face carefully. This time something landed. Not dramatic, but deep. I didn't know you noticed half of this, Kevin said quietly. Daniel gave a small shrug. I didn't either until recently. Kevin looked up. Thank you, he said. Daniel nodded once. Yeah. Sophie's flow unfolded almost invisibly. At one point, they were sitting together, and Kevin had opened the book she'd asked about. So this one, he said, resting it open on his knee. It's less about the events and more about how people interpreted them at the time. Sophie leaned in. That's why you like it? Yeah, he said. Because it shows how perspective shapes everything. Debbie listened from across the room. He wasn't just answering. He was sharing. That was new. Or maybe it had always been there. As the evening settled, the room grew quieter. Not silent, just present. No one was performing. No one was guessing. They were listening. Kevin sat back slightly, looking around at them, not as a snapshot, not as a fixed moment, but as something unfolding. You all seem very coordinated, he said after a while. Daniel smirked. You say that like it's suspicious. It is a little, Kevin replied. Emily smiled. We've been paying attention, she said simply. Kevin held her gaze for a moment, then nodded. I can tell, he said. Later, when the others had drifted into smaller conversations, Debbie found herself beside him again. No urgency, no fear, just steady presence. Better? She asked softly. Kevin considered the question. Then he smiled, not the polite, appreciative one from before. Something quieter, something settled. Yeah, he said. Better. Debbie exhaled, not realizing until that moment how much she had been holding. I didn't want to fix something, she said. I wanted to understand it. Kevin nodded. I know. She looked at him. How did we miss so much? She asked. He shook his head slightly. I don't think we missed it, he said. I think we moved past it without noticing. Debbie tilted her head. That sounds like something that will haunt me later. Kevin smiled faintly. Or something you'll keep paying attention to. She smiled back. That too. The night didn't end with a grand gesture. No speeches. No declarations. Just quiet goodbyes, softer than usual, more intentional. A few extra seconds at the door. A few extra looks that said something without needing to define it. When the house settled again, Kevin stood in the living room, looking at the notebook on the table, the map, the journal, the scattered evidence of something rebuilt. Not perfectly, but honestly. Debbie stepped beside him. Well? She asked. Kevin glanced at her. We're getting closer, he said. That's not a finish line, she replied. No, he agreed. It's better. She slipped her hand into his. This time he held it back differently too. Not out of routine, but awareness. Chapter 10 The Life They Choose Again. There was a particular kind of quiet that settled into the house in the days after the celebration. Not the empty quiet Debbie had grown used to over the years. The one that followed children leaving and routines shrinking, but something fuller. Occupied. As though the space itself had been asked to pay attention. Debbie noticed it first in the mornings. Kevin no longer moved through them entirely on autopilot. He still made coffee. Still checked the news. Still followed the same physical rhythm that habit had built over decades. But now there were pauses. Small ones. Intentional ones. Come here, he said one morning, standing by the window. Debbie looked up from the dishwasher. What? Just come look. She dried her hands and walked over, slightly wary of the vague request. What am I looking at? She asked. Kevin gestured outside. The light, he said. Debbie blinked. The light. Yeah, he said simply. It's different today. She looked where he pointed. It was, to her untrained eye, exactly the same quiet morning they'd had dozens of times before. But she stayed. Because this time he was looking at it as something worth sharing. It feels. He hesitated, searching. Clearer, somehow. Debbie tilted her head. Clearer than what? Than it usually does, he said. She glanced at him, then back out the window. After a moment, she nodded. I see it, she said. She wasn't entirely sure she did. But she was sure of something else. He did. And that mattered. Later that week, they took a walk. Not a planned one. Not a scheduled activity inserted into a calendar like a task to accomplish. Just a walk. Kevin had suggested it casually after dinner. We should get out, he said. Debbie had raised an eyebrow. Who are you? She asked. Apparently, he replied. Someone who likes hiking. She laughed, slipping on her shoes. Well then, she said. Let's not overachieve on day one. They stayed close to home, circling familiar streets that suddenly felt subtly unfamiliar. Not because they had changed, but because the lens through which Debbie saw them had shifted. They walked side by side at first, their pace instinctively matched. Then, gradually, they began to talk. Not about logistics. Not about schedules. Not about updates to be exchanged and completed. Just talk. Did you always want to travel like that? Debbie asked after a while. Kevin glanced at her. Like what? Slowly, she said. The way you described. He thought about it. I don't know if I always wanted it, he said. I think I just never stopped to consider it. Debbie nodded. That seems to be a theme lately. Kevin smiled faintly. Yeah, he said. It does. They walked a few more steps in silence. Would you actually do it? She asked. Take time like that? Kevin looked ahead, his expression thoughtful. With you? He asked. The question landed softly. Debbie smiled. Yes, she said. He considered it a moment longer. Yeah, he said. I think I would. There were still moments of awkwardness. Debbie didn't pretend otherwise. It wasn't as though 27 years could be re-examined without occasionally bumping into habits that no longer fit quite as cleanly. One evening, she caught herself mid-sentence, about to answer a question for him. Kevin noticed. Were you going to speak for me? He asked, his tone light. Debbie froze. Yes, she admitted. He smiled. You've been doing that for years. I know, she said. I didn't realize how much. Kevin shrugged gently. It wasn't always a bad thing. That's generous, she replied. It's accurate, he said. She studied him. You're allowed to tell me when it is a bad thing, she said. Kevin considered that. I'm working on that, he said. She nodded. So am I. The children noticed too. Not in dramatic declarations, not in pointed observations, but in the way conversations shifted. Emily stayed longer on her next visit, her questions less structured, more curious. Sophie showed up without announcing flow, simply joining in whatever was happening. Daniel asked fewer deflecting questions and gave fewer deflecting answers. They didn't fix everything. That wasn't the point. They simply adjusted. and kept adjusting. One afternoon, Debbie found the shoebox again. She hadn't touched it since the night everything had unraveled. Now, she pulled it down from the shelf more deliberately, setting it on the bed where it had first unsettled her. For a moment, she just looked at it. Then she opened it. The contents hadn't changed. The same cards, the same uneven drawings, the same pair of clown-faced socks, but the meaning felt different. Before, it had looked like an absence, a gap, a quiet indication of something lost. Now, Debbie reached in and picked up one of the cards, her fingers tracing the careful, clumsy lines of a child's handwriting. "Happy birthday, Dad." It wasn't the absence of more that struck her anymore. It was the presence of these. What had existed. What still existed. She closed the box gently, then paused. Debbie walked to the dresser and opened a drawer, pulling out a small notebook, one she had started recently, though she hadn't told Kevin about it yet. She sat down on the bed and opened it to a blank page. At the top, she wrote, "Things I notice." She hesitated. Then began. That evening, Kevin found her in the living room, the notebook resting open on her lap. "What's that?" he asked. Debbie looked up. "Something new," she said. "Should I be worried?" "Always," she replied lightly. He smiled, sitting beside her. "Do I get to see it?" "Not yet," she said. He nodded, accepting that without question. "Fair enough." There was a pause. Then Debbie nudged the notebook slightly toward him. "But you can add to it," she said. Kevin blinked. "I can." "Yes." She handed him the pen. Kevin looked at the page, then at her, then back again. "What am I writing?" he asked. "Something you notice," she said. "Something you'd normally skip." He considered that, then leaned forward and wrote slowly, thoughtfully. When he finished, he turned the notebook back toward her. Debbie read the single line. "You listen differently now." Her throat tightened slightly. "That's observant," she said. Kevin smiled faintly. "I'm learning." She looked at him. "So am I." Later that night, as they settled into bed, Debbie didn't watch him from a distance. She moved closer, easily, naturally, deliberately. "You know," she said softly. Kevin turned his head slightly toward her. "What?" "If someone asked me if I was happy," she began. "I'd still say yes." Kevin smiled. "I would too." She paused. "But it would be a different answer now," she added. Kevin considered that. "How?" Debbie thought about it. "Before it was certain," she said. "Immediate, like something already decided." "And now?" he asked. She met his gaze in the dim light. "Now it's chosen," she said. Kevin was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. "Yeah," he said softly. "That's better." Debbie smiled. "It is." The house remained the same. The routines remained. The life they had built did not disappear or fracture under the weight of what they had uncovered. But something essential had shifted. Not dramatically, not loudly, just enough. Enough to turn familiarity into awareness. Enough to turn presence into participation. Enough to remind them, every day in small ways, that love wasn't just something they had built once and maintained without effort. It was something they were still choosing, still discovering, still learning how to see. And this time, they didn't intend to skip anything.